Trevor Lawrence recently signed a 5-year, $255 million extension just weeks after Jared Goff signed his 4-year, $212 million contract extension. Both quarterbacks were paid north of $50 million per year and are now the second and third highest paid quarterbacks per year on an average annual value basis at $53 and $55 million per year. The initial thought from some people was that both quarterbacks were vastly overpaid, and while you can easily make that argument, I don't think either player was overpaid. In today's video, we're going to break down the reality of paying quarterbacks in today's NFL. This video will not just apply to Trevor Lawrence and Jared Goff, because there are a few other quarterbacks that will get paid, and soon, most notably Jordan Love and Tua Tagovailoa. Dak Prescott also applies to today's video, and we will break down his situation too. But in today's video, we will break down what goes into paying a quarterback and the reality of paying a quarterback top dollar in the modern NFL. And there is a lot to break down. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing why quarterbacks get paid. Not in the sense of, oh, well, this Patrick Mahomes guy is pretty good and we should probably try and keep him around, or insert Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and you get the point. Those guys are all elite players and deserve to be compensated based on their play on the field. Not to say Trevor and Jared Goff do not, but nobody would say Jared Goff or Trevor should be paid more than Josh Allen or Mahomes on an AAV basis. And what you may not know is with Jared Goff's $53 million per year deal, he is actually getting paid on average $10 million more per year than Josh Allen. And Trevor, of course, is getting paid on average $12 million per year more than Josh. Mahomes' contract is, of course, an outlier due to it being a 10-year contract, but the reason why Jared and Trevor got paid, aside from being good at the position, is the teams have no other option, and especially Jacksonville. Now, in theory, you could mock up a wild trade that would involve Penei Sewell, Aiden Hutchinson, and a combination of picks to get almost anybody because of how loaded the Lions roster is, but the point is, each team desperately needs their quarterback. And Lions GM Brad Holmes addressed Jared Goff being his quarterback before the extension happened, and basically said, you can get a whole lot worse at quarterback trying to get a fraction better. And what this means to me at least is, yeah, we hear the noise and we know Jared Goff is a good quarterback, but we know he's not the outlier of outliers we have in the NFL. But Jared is anywhere from a top 8 to 12 quarterback, and as we've seen several teams try over the past few years, you can do a whole lot worse than that, especially with the roster the Lions have around Jared. And I bring this up for the Lions specifically because there was a lot of noise during the 2022 draft, when the Lions had the number 2 overall pick, about them drafting a certain quarterback from Liberty and developing him over the next few years. That young man, of course, was Malik Willis. We know how the league felt about the 2022 quarterback draft class, as there was only one quarterback selected in the first 2 rounds, and that of course was Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett is no longer on the team that drafted him, but prior to the draft, there was a lot of buzz about how many quarterbacks would go in the first round. Malik Willis is of course an extreme example because he ultimately went in the 3rd round of the 2022 draft, but the point is, what if the Lions wanted to trade up to go get Anthony Richardson last year? What if they wanted to move up in front of Indy to get to Arizona so they could have the number 3 overall pick to eventually replace Jared Goff? And they easily could have, because remember, they initially had the 6th overall pick before trading back with the Cardinals, who had pick 3, who traded it to Houston so they could go get Will Anderson. By not doing this, and by sticking with Jared Goff rather than try and swing for the fence on a physical phenom in Anthony Richardson, this allowed Detroit to draft Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta. They drafted Gibbs at number 12 overall, which is where the Cardinals traded back to, and also acquired pick 34, which was then used on Laporta. Now, hindsight is always 20/20 because it's incredibly easy to say, well, how didn't the Bears know Mahomes was going to be Mahomes, or insert quite literally any other team with any other prospect, but this goes back to team building and the reality of paying a quarterback in today's NFL. Jared Goff could have had a solid year in 2023 with the weapons he had, prior to selecting Jameer and Sam Laporta, and they could enter the 2024 season with Goff in the final year of his deal, with a now 22-year-old Anthony Richardson as his backup, looking to take over in what would be his third year in 2025. But the Lions drafted two great players and opted to pay their quarterback, despite Goff not being a top 2 or 3 guy in the league. Now, I realize this portion of the video may come off as disrespectful or downplaying what Jared Goff is, and has been over the past few years as a quarterback in the NFL, but that's not intended. My whole point with this when paying quarterbacks is, do not mess with what's working. Don't mess with a guy who just led your team to the NFC Championship game and a guy who has 59 passing touchdowns and 19 interceptions over the last 2 years. And to go back to the ammo for a second to trade up, Houston gave up one of their 2024 first-round picks to move up, as they still had 2 this year from the Deshaun Watson trade, but Detroit had 2 first-round picks last year from the Matt Stafford trade, and the reality is, if they wanted to outbid Houston to move up for AR last year, trust me, they could have, and they would have to go get their guy. And one big thing within this that I didn't mention yet is the jury is still out on Anthony Richardson. He can be a good player in the NFL for a long time, or he can be a draft disappointment or even draft bust. But the Lions stayed put and opted to continue to do what they've been doing since Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell took over back in 2021, which is build the best possible football team they can. Now, Jacksonville, on the other hand, is in a bit of a different situation with Trevor Lawrence, and even with the simple idea of paying a quarterback top dollar, there's almost always 2 routes the franchise can go. You have the Lions route where they pay a good quarterback and put the best possible team around the veteran guy and go from there, or you have the Jacksonville route where you have a young quarterback looking to get paid, and more or less, your job and your entire scouting department and coaching staff's jobs rely on the guy. In this case, it is, of course, Trevor Lawrence. Now, Trevor is a tricky cookie here because there's been insanely high highs through the first few years of his career. One I point to is a touchdown pass he threw in week 1 of the Colts game of last year, where he put a ball where truly the DB had no chance of making a play, and only where his guy could get the football. It was a very good throw and a high IQ play, but with Trevor, there's times where he makes plays despite being a guy who has a couple of years underneath his belt now, where it would be bad if a rookie made this mistake, let alone a player who is 40 plus starts into his career. And the play I referenced from last year is, of course, the red zone interception against the Steelers. I've went over that play on the channel before, but the reality of that interception was Trevor knew as soon as he got back to the sideline what went wrong and what he did wrong. So even though there are very high highs with Trevor and very low lows with him that you often don't see from a guy like Jared Goff, you have to ride with him, period. Jacksonville is not going to get a quarterback better than Trevor Lawrence, and not only are they not reasonably going to get a guy better than Trevor Lawrence, but there's the other factor within paying a quarterback, and that's how many jobs are involved with this lone decision. Technically, this also applies to drafting a quarterback in the first round too, as we've seen a lot of turnover from the 2021 New England staff after they drafted Mac Jones, or even back in 2018 when the Jets drafted Sam Darnold, but those organizations also failed their franchise quarterbacks from the start. Not to say Sam or Mac were destined to be all pros, but you get the point. Now, there's one other thing that I don't think the national media is discussing as much as I think they should, and it's that GM Trent Baalke and head coach Doug Peterson's jobs are a lot warmer than people would probably like to admit. With Jacksonville not being as big as New York or Los Angeles or any of the other major media outlets, the Jags naturally aren't going to get discussed as much as other teams. That's always the way that it's going to be. But this team went from 8-3 to 9-8, and their only win, or playoff win rather, during the Trevor Lawrence rookie window was a playoff win over the Chargers in the wildcard round of the playoffs, which also required one of the biggest collapses in NFL history. history, not just in over the past 2 or 3 years, but in NFL history. This team had back-to-back number 1 overall picks, which they used, of course, on Trevor and Travon Walker, which you can argue is now a trivia question because not a lot of people remember Travon Walker, and they more so remember Aiden Hutchinson from that draft class. But the point is, the front office during Trevor Lawrence's career so far, you can argue, has failed him. So where does that exactly bring us in the Trevor Lawrence timeline? Oh yeah, they only have one solution, and that's to give him over $250 million, hoping that the flashes he's shown through the first 3 years of his career can continue and be more consistent, and that Trevor Lawrence can be the prospect he was hyped up to be a little over 3 years ago. Trevor's situation is also a little different than most other quarterbacks because of who he was as a draft prospect. He was touted as the best quarterback since Andrew Luck for multiple years leading up to the 2021 draft, and after the Jags made a complete joke of his rookie year and hired Urban Meyer and brought in Tim Tebow and had the circus music going and all of that, and we finally saw a glimpse of the player Trevor could be in 2022, especially after they won a playoff game, followed by a disappointing 2023, well, you're hoping that Trevor can become the guy he was down the stretch of the 2022 season, highlighted specifically within the second half of the Ravens game. Now, when you factor everything in the Jags have done or have not done since Trevor was drafted back in 2021, like get him a legitimate good supporting cast that other quarterbacks in the AFC have, well, the Jags really pigeonhole themselves into one position, and that is to pay Trevor Lawrence. Now, down I-95 a few hundred miles to discuss Tua Tagovailoa of the Dolphins. This situation is the most unique of all because of where the Dolphins roster is, along with Tua needing a contract extension. The Dolphins, internally at least, think they are going to make a Super Bowl run. I know they put up 40 total points in their final 3 games of 2023, which were games against the Ravens, Bills, and Chiefs. But it would be ignorant to say the Dolphins, or at least the team that fielded the team against the Chiefs in the playoffs, was the same team they fielded in Week 1 of last year, or will field in Week 1 of this year. But they have guys on their roster like Calais Campbell, Teron Armstead, Jordan Poyer, Raheem Mostert, and Tyreek Hill, all of which are 30 years old or older. Whether or not you think Tua is the long-term guy in Miami, or whether or not you think Tua can win not just a playoff game, but multiple playoff games, and I would imagine most of us don't think he can, the reality is Miami has to pay him, especially with the situation they're in. They don't have another option. In an extreme world, I guess you could say they could let the season play out and not give Tua an extension and bank on Dak being a free agent next year and go for Dak, but that's an incredibly risky play and one that you could do in Madden, but when there's guys' jobs on the line in real life and guys' families on the line, well, simply put, this won't happen. So I do expect Tua to get close to $200 million over the next 4 years, if not over 200, because again, Miami has no other option. Technically, they could trade away Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and even Jalen Phillips when he gets back from injury to show that he has good trade value and go for a rebuild, but again, this isn't Madden where you hit simulate to the end of the regular season and give it another try next year. Dak Prescott and the Cowboys are in a unique situation because of where the franchise is and where they are headed. I do think the Cowboys are going to be between 9 to 12 wins again, but not go very far in the playoffs. I don't have a lot of confidence in the Cowboys when the postseason rolls around, and the Green Bay game left a sour taste in my mouth in terms of evaluating Dak moving forward. And that's frustrating because of how good Dak played for most of the 2023 season. He had truly elite moments during the 2023 season, but the decision as to whether or not Dallas is going to pay him is going to rely on how he does in the 2024 playoffs. Dak is in a much different situation than most quarterbacks because he's already been paid, and not only has he already been paid, but he can go to management next year and name his price, because if they say no, then he can go to a team like Las Vegas or even the division rival Giants and go get paid. Dallas's 2 big stars in CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons would be in their mid-20s, and after a year of a competitive rebuild, well, Dallas would hopefully be back to seriously competing. The reality is, for a lot of teams, most of the time, they have to roll with what they have at the quarterback position because it is incredibly hard to get better at the position versus how easy it is to get substantially worse at the position. Please check out the Football Analysis podcast if you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 36% of people watching are subscribed and helps the channel tremendously. Please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.